musical prodigy of the Van Halen brothers, mixed with the incredible screams and wails and frontmanship of the one and only David Lee Roth, made the band that made a stream of albums so incredibly amazingly good it makes even nuns horny. Who else can I be talking about than the incredible Van Halen? All from 1978 with their first debut album, all the way up to 1984, their last album with David Lee Roth. Truly, some of the greatest music is captured in these amazing, amazing strings of albums. But not only is the music absolutely freaking incredible, but also the stories behind each of the songs, each of the albums as a whole, is worth an entire video series which I shall be starting today. And I thought, what better way to start off with Van Halen 1984. But 1984 is easily the album that I could talk about the most. So much that I'm going to make this a two-part video. So stay tuned in this video, I'm going to tell you all the backstory behind the album, as well as much as I can through the songs. I'll get up to this song in this video. And then next week you'll get the rest of the video talking about the rest of the songs, and then what happened after the album, because that's also something to talk about. Because 1984 is the album that was the last one that David Lee Roth did with Van Halen. Ignoring Different Kind of Truth, because we don't talk about that. But anyways, enough of the yapping, let's get into the yapping. So, our story doesn't start in 1984, it starts a little bit earlier, where Eddie, the guitar god, remember, Eddie is the absolute guitar legend of the 80s right now. Everybody is trying to copy him. Everyone wants to be like Eddie because Eddie sells. And Eddie is the sound of hair metal, is the sound of rock, is the sound of metal. Eddie is everything, right? He's that guitar legend. But the thing you need to know about Eddie is that he's always strived for musicality, really pushing his abilities to the limits in terms of creativity. Whereas Dave was always a guy that was following commercial success and getting loads of money, getting loads of girls and, you know, all that stuff. Which, obviously, is going to conflict in the band. And so when Eddie would come up to Dave and go, "Dave, look, I got this really cool synth part that I want to do," Dave is like, No. However, in Women and Children First, the third album, he did manage to sneak in a little bit of synth. If you listen to The Cradle Will Rock, you can hear, I think it's a Wurlitzer organ or something like that he runs through his rigs. So that guitar riff that you hear is not actually guitar. But Eddie is told, "Look, Eddie, you're really, really great with synths. Don't get me wrong, you make some really, really damn cool music. But you are the guitar guy." And this isn't just Dave saying it, it's the rest of the management team, as well as the producers and Warner Brothers, because Eddie is on guitar. And if you think about it, the management, they're focused on what the music is selling. They don't care about the music itself, they just want the money from it. And so if you take the guitar god of our time and make him not play guitar, that's probably not going to sell. Because people listen to Van Halen for the guitar and the rock and all that. So why would you do anything different if we're talking purely about money? But obviously Eddie didn't think about money as much. So about like 1982, maybe 1983-ish, Eddie comes up with this amazing demo that he's got worked on a synth. No guitar at all, pure synth. And this is what today we know as Jump. And he shows it to Dave and he's like, "Why don't we put this on our new record?" And Dave's like, "No, buddy, no, we're not going to do that." And so Eddie kind of shelved it for a little bit. And because Eddie wanted to delve more into these creative musical ideas that he had, he decided, well, if I can't do it in the studio, why don't I just build a studio? And so that's what he did. And that's where we get 5150 from. 5150 being the state code for police to identify when a mad person's gone loose. But Eddie builds this incredible home studio that he called a racquetball court because permits and all that stuff that I don't know about. And funnily enough, the walls of 5150 are bulletproof, just in case you wanted to know. But Eddie spends all of his time in his home studio. He loves it to death because Eddie can be Eddie in this place, and he's not governed by people around him trying to make money. Eddie can focus on what he wants to do. But after releasing Dive It Down, my second favourite Van Halen album, don't hate me, Van Halen take a little bit of a hiatus, which they were going to do before Dive It Down, but then they got told that they had to do Dive It Down, so they didn't. So after this, 1983, no Van Halen albums come out. This is where the band works on what they're going to do for their next record, as well as having a little bit of a break from music. But the thing is, the time to record a Van Halen record was never ever that long. Like the first album took like a couple of weeks, I think. Second album took like 10 days. The third album took like 2 weeks. Van Halen were always a one take is best kind of band. Because that method is what captured their raw, improvising style of music. That's what made Van Halen Van Halen. Yet 1984 took 3 months to record, which is completely unheard of with Van Halen. This is because Eddie was layering up what he wanted the music to sound like, because he finally got the green light from Dave and the rest of the band to be like, okay, fine, you can just do it and we'll see how it goes. So Eddie, he's finally got his creative freedom that he's always wanted. And so he starts coming up with synths. Now, the thing about Eddie is that he was never a guy that would just sit there and think, okay, I've got a sound in my head in the synth, let me try and recreate that. he would just twist the knobs on his Oberheim, because he used an Oberheim for the entire album. He would just twist the knobs and listen to it, and if it sounds good, it sounds good. Which I'm sure must have been a complete nightmare if he wanted to rework something after he'd worked on something else. But they record the album in 3 months, and they're ready to release it. Now, before we get into the actual music of the album, because that's probably what you're here for, let's talk a little about the artwork, because the artwork is easily as iconic as any of the tracks on this record. Now, we know it as this little, like, cherub Cupid looking baby that was smoking cigarettes, because it's the 80s, you can kind of do whatever you want. Originally, they hired this woman called Margot Nahas, and they're like, okay, what we want to do is we want to have 4 women in chrome dancing. Let's be real, that's probably David Lee Roth's idea, but I'm not too sure if it was. Probably was, though. And Margot was like, that's a little bit difficult to do, why don't I try something else? That's where she gets her friend's kid and sits him down and paints him. And she gives him little wings and a little cigarette. Margot is an absolute freaking genius, because if you think, angels, they are the symbol of purity, divineness, innocence. An angel is the closest you can get to God without being God, right? They're how we see holiness. But then, you give that symbol a pack of cigarettes, it's immediately completely different, because you get the ultimate contradiction, right? Or should I say, conch-addiction. But this complete juxtaposition is a great metaphor for what Van Halen are like. Because remember, this is a band that went against absolutely everything they listened to. They're the ones that defined the genre of hair metal, because they wanted to do something completely different, which is why they did so well. Look at Van Halen 1. That sold 10 million records because it was just that great and that different that everybody wanted to copy that. So the 80s stopped being about all whatever was happening in the 70s, and it became, let's be Van Halen. Another thing about this album cover is that it's completely different to what Van Halen had before. Because if you think their last couple of albums, Van Halen 1, that's just kind of the 4 guys in their 4 corners. Van Halen 2 is just blue. Van Halen 3 is just green with them in the middle. Van Halen 4 is an artwork that Alex found and thought was cool. Van Halen 5 was just red with a white stripe because it was a flag for Diver Down. This is the first album cover they had that's truly like artistic, you know? The first time they were actually doing something with what the cover actually looked like. Now, don't get me wrong, I actually loved the album covers they had before, but this is the first one where you look at it and you can really just like look and like all of the different details on it. I do that as if people look at vinyls anymore. I really want a 1984 vinyl. Anyway, I'm going to go off topic if I keep talking about that. Speaking of the vinyl, if you look on the back of the vinyl, you see something very, very cool. Because they followed this like strange off theme by having green futuristic outfits of them on the back of the vinyl. If I can find a picture, you can see it right there. Pretty groovy. Fun fact, you'll see how PC the world was in 1984, because when it got released, sensor bars were put over the cigarettes. It's the 80s, like everybody smoked in the 80s, and yet they're covering up the cigarettes. I find that funny. Anyways, that is enough about the artwork. Let's get more into the music side of it. Now, put your mind to someone before 1984's come out, like January 8th, a day before the album comes out. Van Halen, in your mind, they're the band, they're hard rock, they're insane guitar, flaming solos, all that yumminess, right? And you hear that there's this new Van Halen record coming out, if we ignore the singles, obviously. And we're expecting there to be just punches in the face constantly by this incredible, amazing guitar work, these wails from David Lee Roth, these slams by Alex Van Halen, and the audibleness of Michael Anthony's bass. You're expecting to be slapped in the face by this record. As David Lee Roth said, a Van Halen record is the kind of record where you put it on your record player and it melts down and it destroys all the rest of your records, because now you can't listen to anything but Van Halen. Yes, David Lee Roth actually said that, and I 100% agree with him. But you got into this record, and the very intro, the track that I don't think I've ever heard anybody talk about before, the actual track 1984 itself, it is an instrumental intro to the rest of the album that's kind of setting you up for what the album's going to be. Now, if we look at Van Halen 1, the intro track, Running with the Devil, you had those devilish car horns in the background going, before you went into it, immediately setting an insanely like, what the hell is going on atmosphere, right? The rest of the albums, they also did this. They started off in a weird way to make you go, oh, this is cool. Just like Women and Children First, Everybody Wants Some, it starts off with like jungle drumming from Alex and Dave going in the background, because that's what Dave does best. This album is no different from some of their other ones, in the fact that in 1984 it was this instrumental synth space weirdness going on. Now, something that I have heard is that David Michael... Who is David Michael? Michael Anthony even says that he made this track. Because if you didn't know, in the live sets of Van Halen, he would do this ultra bass solo, which, if you've not watched it, I don't know if I should recommend or not, because it's a bit weird. He would just kind of run around the stage being really, really energetic while making this bass go. That's pretty much it. And then he'd lie on the floor for a bit and then like play again. Michael Anthony's like one heck of a dude, right? But Michael Anthony says that he made this 1984 track by doing what he would do live, right? Just like Eddie had his Eruption, Michael Anthony had his 1984. Eddie said that he made this just by messing about on his synths. Now, what the truth is, I'm not sure, because obviously you've contradicting sides. That's up for discussion, because I don't know the truth. But 1984, it completely sets a mood, because, don't get me wrong, I wouldn't listen to this track if I had to. Like, whenever I put on the album, I usually skip it. It's really, really great for the fact that, again, Van Halen, they're this rock, raw, awesome, epic guitar showcase people, right? And so when you play this record expecting that, you've got it in your mind, Van Halen is a band that is about to rock my socks off, dude. But then you put it on and you hear weird space music and you're like... Anyways, that's enough talking about 1984 because it's probably the most someone's ever spoken about that track. Let's get into the actual album itself. Now, there were 4 singles released, which was Panama, Jump, I'll Wait, and Hot for Teacher. The 4 songs on this album that probably most people are most likely to know. But we're going to start off with the first track, the most famous one on the record, Jump. Now, Jump is one of those tracks where even if you don't know who Van Halen are, you have to know Jump. Jump is like the most iconic synth intro of all time. And I'm lucky enough to be the synth player in a lot of 80s bands, which means I get to play that riff all the time and dive so heavily into the music of Jump and why it sounds so great. Because, believe it or not, the amazing synth stuff in Jump isn't just in the intro and all that stuff and the solo itself. It's throughout the entire song. It just sounds incredible. I promise you, even if you're not a synth player, if you just have a listen to the isolated synth tracks to Jump, it just sounds so freaking cool, man. Because obviously the verses follow the same dun 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 stuff. But in the choruses, it's still playing really interesting pieces. And again, this is a band that is a guitar-oriented band, and yet I'm talking about the incredible synth work before I even talk about the guitar. Don't get me wrong, the guitar part in Jump is super duper cool. It may only be in the choruses and he's just doing a little bit of an arpeggio, but it adds so much to the song, but not as much as the synth pop. Obviously, it's a synth song, right? Synth pop, synth rock, synth metal, whatever you want to call it. But during the choruses of Jump, you have these really awesome layers that fit together really, really well. And even if the synth levels are turned down during that, so you can't really hear it, when you notice it, you can't unnotice it, because it just adds that so much like punch to the song that you're listening to. I always have violent imagery when I'm talking about music. My therapist might say something about that. But anyways, I don't need a therapist, I've got guitars. The song is somewhat generic. It follows, you know, verse, chorus, solo, chorus. So it's quite simple. Let's just take a moment to look at the solo section of Jump. Because, broken record, Van Halen, guitar band. But a theme that's going to come up incredibly heavily throughout this entire album is the fact that the solo is completely different to the rest of the song, right? And we will see this in the other songs, but in Jump, the entire song, it's in C, right? Because when Eddie played the keyboard, he didn't want to have to play in a stupid key, so he would change everything to suit the keyboard's tuning. 12-tone equal temperament. Anyway, enough of that nerdy crap. So, you think the solo is probably just going to be in C2, that's normal, right? No, Eddie just thinks, let me just modulate down an entire tone, 2 semitones, because why not? I'm Eddie Van Halen, I can do whatever the hell I want. So the guitar solo is in B flat. As guitarists, there are certain keys that we just really don't like playing in because we have to either bar way too much, we get no open strings or something like that. B flat is one of the keys that just kind of sucks for playing because A, absolutely lovely. B is quite nice too. B flat is just, you just don't like it. We don't like that key, alright? Because we can't do the fun things we want to do unless you're playing frickin' Johnny Be Good or whatever. Which most people who play that still play in A. Anyways, Eddie, being a guitar player, somewhat human, he also doesn't like playing in B flat. So he thought instead of playing in B flat, he'll just change the tuning of his guitar. So he plays in A position, but it comes out in B flat. So he tunes up a semitone, just so he doesn't have to play in a weird key. It's easy to think that our favourite God players are God players and not human at all, but I guess they're human too. If you want to learn about the human side of Van Halen, you should watch my entire video talking about the backstory of them, before they were Van Halen, before the band. And then the keyboard solo comes in. Now, the entire song's in C, but we've just taken a dive to B flat. The guitar solo, it's like a sudden jump, which makes your ears perk up and think what's happening. So your ears are ready to hear Eddie, which is an incredibly smart thing to do. Only when it's done right. Don't start playing in C and doing some crappy solo in F sharp, because it just won't work unless you actually know what you're doing. Keyboard solo comes up just after this, and you think, okay, so we're going to stay in B flat because it's still the solo section. No, we're going to go back to C, because not only are we going back to our home key, but because we're in B flat before, because we're modulating up a tone, we get a way brighter, nicer sound. So not only did Eddie change to B flat to have the guitar stand out, but he's had it so we had that even more of an uplift when we get into the keyboard solo. Now, the keyboard solo is freaking epic. How can you not think that keyboard solo is just really, really cool? Because it does mimic the main motif that he has in the intro. But not only that, but he adds to it and gives it more movement. Not just by moving the right hand as you would usually do, but he moves the bass and what's happening underneath the solo that changes it completely. So you get that feeling of standing still with the world changing around you as opposed to moving around the world. That's probably a really weird metaphor to say, but if you really think about it, you can actually feel it in the music. Because if you take the second half of that keyboard solo, Eddie's just staying on a suspended 2 chord, and he's just going up and down, and the rest of the band descend. Makes you feel like you are the pattern that's staying still, and everything is kind of swarbling around you. Swarbling? That's a new word. Which is something that you don't really get with music, because the solo tends to be spotlight on this person who's being really cool and playing something fast and flashy. In this, we had the complete opposite, where it's like, alright, I'm just gonna chill here, and the spotlight is on everyone else. And that just works perfectly, especially because we are mimicking that original motif of bam, 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 bam. So it just works out really, really nicely. The ending, we finally get in a little bit more guitar with a simple motif of going da 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 da, that part. This is further showing us the layers that Eddie is building into his music, because he's having that main motif we've had throughout the entire song on synth, while chugging some chords, while feeling a bit fancy and doing some cool melody. But the melody is not overpowering the rest of the music, because when you have layered music, it's really easy to go completely overboard and get really, really busy. But Eddie uses that space and fills in what's necessary. Which, as guitarists, we suck because all we want to do is play fast and cool and snazzy and loud. But Eddie knows exactly what to do at what point in the song, which completely stands out from a lot of other music, where again, the solos have to be bigger and they have to be better. I saw a show from Dio in the 80s where the guitarist, he's like shooting a laser at like a mechanical spider coming down from the ceiling. Freaking insane, man. But the 80s, you know what it was like. Enough about Jump, we move on to the next song. Now, we've just had the kick in the face, not of like a truly insane song, but in the sense that we have Van Halen, this rock, heavy, awesome band, and then we've just been hit in the face with a synth pop song. So you're thinking, okay, Van Halen, they've taken a bit of a detour, they're going somewhere else with their music. They're experimenting and they're trying something new, and it's up to us whether we like that or not. And we're thinking, okay, Van Halen's taken a new direction. This is quite interesting. Let's see where this goes. And then Panama, the second track. Panama is one that I could just talk about forever, because Panama is a soundtrack that we want our lives to be about. Did I English that right? I think I did. Panama is the most hair metal, incredible blend of hard rock, pop, and metal, because it just worked. And it's even got some progressive feeling in it, because Panama is such a feel-good song, and I know feel-good is heavily overused in stupid radio. Listen to feel-good music till this morning, bro. But it makes you feel really, really great, because it gives you a sense of, oh, this is really nice. I want this to be the soundtrack to my day, like I said before. But we've just come off the smooth, cloudy feeling of Jump, and then it goes on to the next track. We start off Panama, Alex's right foot just hitting a normal beat, and Eddie comes in, but Eddie doesn't just come in. He comes in on the weird upbeats. So he's directly contrasting what Alex is doing. And it's not only the rhythm that makes you think, whoa, this sounds quite jolty and cool, but the fact that Eddie can play chords but still have a melody get pulled out of it. where Eddie's playing the chords but you can still hear the melody shining up above it. And then when he finally gets to that relative minor in the C sharp, the rest of the band finally kicks in and you think, whoa, okay, Van Halen, they're not taking a new turn, they are still this hard rock hitting band, right? In 2 tracks in the album, again ignoring 1984, you've had the first hit in the face of, okay, we've got a different sound, this isn't the rock Van Halen. And then the second hit in the face is realising, no, that's just adding to it. We're not going somewhere new with Van Halen, we're staying where we are, but we're developing, we're evolving, we're maturing into more synth pop, but still having that heavy hard rock feel that Eddie Van Halen brought to Van Halen with his heavy guitars. The thing about the intro to Panama is that it's such a great intro that I see guitarists say this quite a lot. I'm sure you probably agree as well. If one of us mere mortals, managed to write the intro to Panama, I guarantee that riff would have been used in the entire song because it's such an incredible riff that you just want to repeat it. You'd want to get as much as you possibly can because how the hell are you supposed to write something that is better than that can build off of that? But with Eddie, we hear that riff in the intro and then we don't hear it again. It's Eddie going, I can play something freaking incredible, but I'm such an amazing guitarist that I can write more incredible things because things just flow out of me. So I don't even need to repeat it because I can still fill in with loads of other incredible riffs. That's probably not exactly what Eddie was thinking, but that's how it feels. Because Eddie can just ooze out these amazing riffs. Ooze is a really weird word, I wish I didn't say that. But when the band kicks in again on that C sharp, you feel that amazing like sudden bump of like, oh my god, what the hell is going on? This is so cool. And because we had that sudden kick of the band coming in, when everybody drops out and Eddie hits those harmonics, it hits even harder. Because you notice the absence a lot more when you've experienced what it's like to not have the absence in. So when the absence occurs, you have something to contrast it to. That made no sense. When the band drops out, it's even more hard hitting because you know what it sounds like when the band are playing all together. Which has a knock-on effect because when the band does come back in, it feels like a punch in the face and Dave is wailing all over the place like awesome Dave is. And it just works perfectly. Especially because the chorus riff, the thing that the kind of song builds around, it's not a hard riff, it's literally just E-A-D. But Eddie was forfeiting needing it to sound really technically amazing like he did in his previous riffs. Just like if you listen to the verse riff of Unchained, you can't really dance to that because it's really technically like, ooh, this is cool. Whereas Panama is equally cool, but you can still dance to it, you can feel the pulse in your body. But we get this intense burst of energy at the start of the song. But when we go into the verses, it's nice and chilled out, which is following that idea of pushing and pulling between the energy. So like chilling out with the energy, so when you kick the energy back in, you really, really feel it in the choruses. But before you get to the chorus, you need to build up that energy because you can't just kick them in the face because that can be fatiguing. So what Eddie does is he goes into a weird chord, F sharp with an open E and B, and the backing vocals kick in and you're thinking, whoa, where's this going? I can feel where it's going, but I don't know in my head where it's going. So when you get hit with that weird progressive, you're like, okay, we're about to go somewhere, like you're about to jolt off somewhere. And then you feel those familiar harmonics kick back in, straight into the chorus, so you get that really intense build-up, that sudden moment of pause, and then the launch into the song. You can probably tell why I love breaking down songs, because there's so much energy and so much thought behind everything that goes into it, even if they're not thinking exactly what I'm saying. The fact that they can convey these intense, strong emotions and this push and pull of energy is super duper cool. And for me at least, Van Halen do that better than anyone else. Anyways, as I said before, an extended theme throughout this entire album is in the guitar solos being completely disconnected in a really great way to the rest of the song. Just like Jump, we had it in B flat when the entire song was in C. Panama follows that theme through because we're playing in E. If we get a guitar solo that comes in just like a generic, Eddie Van Halen one, in E, that might not have much of an impact because our ears have gotten used to being in E. So Eddie plays on that and we're expecting to hear it in E, but then we get a descent into B, modulating an entire fifth, where Eddie rocked an insanely cool solo with really weird out of time but in time tapping and just firing everywhere. It's super duper cool. Because your ears are expecting something, but then it gets thrown in a different direction. And this push and pull of our attention and our expectations is what makes it feel, whoa, what are we doing? Because we feel at home with E, when we move to B, we feel like we're going somewhere new, which keeps the ear really entertained. In the same way, if you move away from home too much, the ear doesn't know where home is, so you don't have a nice resolution. Which is why I personally don't like super progressive atonal music. But that's just my opinion. But after the solo, we get descending run back into our home, which is E, so we feel more grounded, it's more chilled out, and we feel like we can relax after the intense outburst of energy we got during the solo. And this is where Dave says his, his usual jargon of like, pull the seat back, I barely see the road in front of me. And just when you think, okay, we're at home now, we're kind of chilled out now, suddenly you get kicked into a bah, which we're staying in E, but now we're getting a kick because we're building back into what we had before. And they do this insanely well by going up chromatically. Because we're chromatically building up, we're feeling more and more like, oh, we're going somewhere again, when you get launched straight back into that main chorus. And it just works super duper well. Panama did incredibly well, quite obviously because it's such an insanely well thought out and good song to listen to. A lot of really well thought out songs may not do as well because you can tell that they're really well thought out because there's like, oh no, they go through a bunch of key changes, or they go through a bunch of time signature changes, or just something in general that makes you think, okay, we're really like planning this out. And so you lose that spontaneity. But with Van Halen, they use that spontaneity to make you think, okay, where are we going to go next? So you build excitement into what you're listening to. And so when we come back home with the chorus, it feels extra intense. And again, Van Halen is playing off this expectation that now we're riding this sense of energy we've got in the choruses. So when we end Panama, it's a complete dead cut, because you're riding this energy and then you suddenly stop. So they're playing with that expectation to make us feel more intensely about the music. And again, they might not have thought, okay, we want to play with expectations by doing that. But the fact that it just comes out of them and they do it incredibly well and so incredibly musically that it just works perfectly. And that's why, in my eyes, Eddie and David Lee Roth were the best duo of songwriters ever, because Dave wasn't a good singer. I'm not going to sit here and say Dave was an incredible singer, but the fact that he could package Eddie's incredible songwriting and composition and playing while adding parts over it, like the wailing to make you think, whoa, what's going on? And building that sense of the incredible rock anthems that he made with his unique voice made him way better of a singer than anyone else could ever be. Not technically, but in terms of the way that he could actually fit the music. Because to me, Van Halen with anyone that isn't David Lee Roth isn't Van Halen, because David Lee Roth was the one that took Eddie Van Halen's playing and threw it into what the incredible things that we know are today. That wasn't English. But anyways, I've been yapping for absolutely ages, so I really hope you learned something new. Stay tuned for the next video, because I guarantee you'll know 100 new things there, because you know what I'm like with my yapping. So go watch the next video if it's out by then. If not, I will see you guys there. So have a great day. But yeah, go listen to 1984, and I will see you on the flip side. So bye bye, enjoy your day. Yeah!